Marie Forleo once said, never start a business to just make money, start a business to make a difference, which is exactly what our speaker today has achieved. Extending our warmest greetings to the people tuning in. I'm Shreya Swami, and
I'm Samiksha
we
Dubey.
have, yeah, and we are your hosts for the podcast episode of the Sissy Squad through Shisha. We are excited to introduce you all to our guest for the day, Miss Ritika Saraswat. Good evening, ma'am. We are overjoyed to have you on our podcast.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here and I hope we have some amazing conversations and everyone gets a lot of value out of this. So excited.
Thank you, ma'am. So delving straight into the interview, I'd like to begin with a short introduction of yours for our listeners. Um, so Ms. Ritika is a speaker, creator, writer, founder, and a human capital consultant at Deloitte. She is involved in the space of empowering international students through her organization called Redefined and has been able to empower over 20,000 children within Canada till now via her events, workshops, and community channels on WhatsApp, and also through her LinkedIn account having over 50,000 members. Additionally, her company has also uplifted the youth from underprivileged communities, more than 30,000, across 4 countries by providing them with access to education in the form of workshops, seminars, online Zoom events, mentorship programs, etc., and necessary resources. For her work, she has been awarded the iconic Women Award for creating a change in the world by the Women Economic Forum and the Indian Achievers Award by IAF. She was also selected as one of the top 3 professionals in Canada to be an ambassador and a speaker at the One Young World Conference 2023 in Ireland. She is a 2 time TEDx speaker and has been featured in multiple articles for her work, like the Michigan Times, studyinternational.com, and more.
She has also been given the opportunity to speak at events for students from several universities, including UBC, Humber College, Toronto Metropolitan University, and even some universities in the US on topics surrounding job research, networking, and even sharing her experience being a female founder of a global nonprofit.
We mentioned that you have your own organization, which is called Redefined, and I'm sure it must have been daunting for you to start your own business venture. So, what is it that inspired you to start Redefined?
Yeah, no, great question. I think for me, it was mainly two things. One is my own experiences, right? I think when I came to Canada, especially myself as an international student, and that too was like a woman of color, I started realizing how just based on how I look and my gender, etc., a lot of people had so many stereotypes and assumptions that they can draw about me, my capabilities, who I can grow up to become, right? And most often or not, you sometimes see people in Canada have this perception that a lot of students, especially those coming from India, are here just to get their PRs, just to work at cafes and restaurants, and that's how they want to progress, right? But a lot of us have very different careers and ideas, right? And I initially started realizing how those things in many ways were hampering my progress and influencing the outcomes that I got out of opportunities. So I think just realizing that I wanted to, like initially I did not even have access to a community, a network, or resources that I could tap into of people who come from the same experiences as me, right? And who have faced these issues, but maybe a year before, right? And therefore they know how to cope with these. And I think once I was able to get over these situations, through just pushing myself to network, put myself out there, personally brand myself, I started realizing the importance of creating that community, because what may have taken me, let's say, a year to do, I know today students could even accomplish that within 2 months, right? Because of creating that access to a community that they have, right? And I think that was one of the main motivations behind starting Redefine as an organization, to really create that access to opportunities, resources, and mentors also, so that students can really succeed in their lives in the ways they want to. And I think the second biggest reason was also because whatever organizations currently did exist, at that time at least, they weren't necessarily youth representative organizations. What I mean by that is they were organizations who had founders who were 45 years plus, right? With professionals with 25 plus years of experience. And even though that is great and there's a lot of knowledge there, but I think at the end of the day, you need that relevant experience, knowledge to be provided to you, which can only be provided to someone who is in the same age bracket as you, right? So that may be someone who, let's say, is only 2 to 3 years elder to you and maybe has a job today and you may not, right? So I think we are like a completely youth run organization, purely run on students. So that, I think, felt like a need again in the market, and that's when we started with that.
Thank you, ma'am, for giving us a little bit insight about that. So, next question to you is, how do we as students get started with small business startup if we have access to minimal resources?
Yeah, no, good question. So I think like a big part of it, to be honest, is I think this is also a misconception. People think you need to be rich to start a business. I don't know who spread this amongst people, but you don't need to, right? Because again, it depends on multiple factors. I'm not sure how much it takes to start a non-for-profit in India, specifically from a monetary perspective. But let's say in Canada, it costs about $200, a one-time fee to just get your non-for-profit established. And I know even in India, it's not that expensive to get your organization established, because there are other ways around it also. You don't always need to register as a non-for-profit. You could register as a society to start with. Like even a lot of people, let's say, who want to start businesses, I always tell them, hey, if you think that, say, getting that business license is expensive to you, start something else, right? Like doesn't mean you start a new company, but what I mean is you could start as a society, let's say, initially. As soon as you start making revenues, incomes, and you feel like you're expanding well enough and you've created the money to be able to invest into it, then start looking into a business license, right? But I think stopping, how do I say, stopping yourself from taking that first step because of the worry that, hey, I need to invest money, should not be the reason, right? If you don't start a business, make sure the reason is something else, but not money. Because if money is the reason, then there are ways around it, right? And that's something that we can control. So I think for anyone who's ever thinking of also starting a business, I would say, especially when you're younger, I know sometimes a lot of people are like, oh, I'm still very young, I don't need to do it now. No, in fact, I think that's the best time to do it, because you have the flexibility, right? Like, you have your parents to take care of you. Even if, let's say, you come with a family with very limited resources, you still are not the sole breadwinner of the family. So you have the flexibility to try different things and take calculated risks, right? What I mean by that is, you don't need to just leave your education and everything and start a business, right? You don't need to always do that. When you think there's scope, yes, I wouldn't say I encourage you to leave school, but I would say if it feels right, do it. But all I'm trying to say is, at the end of the day, I think you just need to evaluate your current context and make those calculated risks. I know a lot of students, at least in Canada, I hear from them is, Ritika, even need to do part-time jobs. How will I take out time? So it's then up to you, right? Like, instead of working 7 days a week, work on that part-time job 5 days a week and leave those 2 days a week to work on your business or your idea, right? So I think it's all about drawing that balance in life, so that you don't go all in and sacrifice your current financial status and well-being, because at the end of the day, bringing food to the table, I know, is more important than anything else, right? And taking care of your family is more important. But I think prioritizing those things, and especially for youth and young people, I think the earlier they get started, the even better it is, because you get more time to experiment and try different things. Yeah.
Thank you. That was very useful. Um, like what you said, like I heard my father say that exact thing, and I always used to brush it off as him being my parent and telling me to take that risk. But actually, like seeing young entrepreneurs like you is actually really inspiring, and yeah, that was very useful.
No, and I would
Um,
tell you honestly, is like, if your parents also supporting your Samiksha, it's very, I wouldn't say rare, but it's not that often you get as supportive parents who are like, hey, go run a business. So I think people, like us, even I'm very privileged that I have parents who allow me to do what I want to do. And I think we should really use that to our advantage. So that I think, especially, being a woman, I feel like in many ways, I always feel this sense of responsibility that if I'm lucky enough to get parents like these, I use that opportunity to prove to the other parents also on why they should be creating these opportunities for their girls as well, right? Because see, this is who I became because of those access to opportunities, and your girl could also become the same if you do the same. So I think, if you're getting that flexibility, you should definitely do it.
exactly.
You're
I
right.
think for me, you're actually like an example of that, and I'm definitely going to think of doing this. Um, so, so you mentioned that after your graduation, you'd moved to Canada to the University of British Columbia for pursuing, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, but Is
Kinesiology.
it kinesiology, right?
Yes.
So do you have any tips on like how to invest and save as international students who are on a budget?
Good question. I feel like from an investing and saving perspective, I think the biggest thing is realize the currency difference. I was in a podcast yesterday as well, and I told them that my first week in Canada, I was like, oh, things are so cheap. And I think, I don't know why, maybe I was just 18, maybe I was too young and I didn't realize things, but I was like, oh, things are so cheap. But because in my head that $20 sandwich is seeming 20 rupees to me, and I'm like, wow, that's great. And I remember first week after spending a bunch of money, I remember checking my bank account and I was like, wow, that looks like a lot of money gone. And I remember chatting with my dad and I was like, Papa, I spent so much money. And he was like, I was like, that's so less, right? He's like, do you realize how much money that is? Convert that. And I was like, oh my God, like that's a lot of money. And that was the day I think I realized that idea of financial independence. And that, it's me from here and I need to make sure I have all of this under check, because I think for a lot of us when we're back home in India, when we are living with our parents, usually they are doing the finances, right? They are buying things for us, right? Even a simple thing as chocolate or going to a cafe, right? They are usually the one paying. You get your food and you sit down and start eating, right? So I think those small things I started realizing were creating such a huge difference. So I think for me the biggest thing was, like I think the biggest part of financial literacy starting was this idea that, hey, like, you got to learn how to manage money in the first place. And I think a lot of people don't have that awareness till very later on, right? They still think it's okay. But I think especially when you move abroad, you need to, a lot of students will start earning themselves, because you need to, because of how expensive things are, and you can't just rely on your parents to be supporting you, right? So for example, even for myself, right, even though my parents paid for my tuition, things such as my stay, things such as food, those things would have to come from me, right? And I think for me, like initially it was never about managing the money. Initially what I realized, it was just to earn the money first, because it can be tricky to even get jobs in Canada, right? And a big part of it is because of the number of immigrants and international students moving to Canada, that it is becoming so highly competitive, and sometimes places may not even have spots available, right? Or jobs available for you to join them, right? So I think initially that was the struggle, and I think once I got those jobs and started earning money well enough, I think then it was just making sure I'm not spending as much, because it can be fairly easy to spend in Canada, especially when you're working multiple shifts outside, because then you tend to buy outside food when you're hungry, right? And outside food can be a lot more expensive than what you can cook at home. Even transit in Canada is expensive. You need to pay for it, right? So I think those things do add up. And I think for me, what I realized is, in the way I proceeded with it, I would just make sure 80% of my income I put it in my savings account and 20% in my checkings, right? And that's the simplest way to start. Obviously the ideal way is to do investments and everything, but initially, if nothing else, I would say just put 80%, 80 to even 90% sometimes if you can, into your savings account, and leave the rest in checking, so that if you even ever start spending, when your card declines, you have reached your spending limit, right? And that helps you keep in check in many ways, right? So yeah, that's something I used to do.
These are some quite useful tips. Even I'm learning how to save up money. Uh, I would like to share a little bit of my experience over here about saving money. That I come from a family which is not that supportive in these things. So I started learning these things like saving up money and earning up a little bit, even if it's something like freelancing, doing something on internet. So this is a thing I really appreciate about which young children needs to learn. Uh, the financial independency.
Yeah, and I think financial independence is very important because it ties into your confidence in yourself, right? The day I started making money and I was like, oh, I'm buying that meal for myself with my money, right? That was just a very proud feeling for myself, right? And today, I'm able to buy my parents gifts like iPhones or and other fancy things that I've always wanted to gift them. And I think I remember, like, sometimes people used to also ask me, Ritika, why do you try to do so much for international students? And I said the reason is because the day I got my first paycheck and when I was able to buy my mom that phone or whatever, right? The sense of pride I felt I wanted everyone to feel it, right? Because it feels so good to give back to your loved ones, right? That's what we all live for most of the time, right? So I think it's exactly that.
Very true. So my next question to you is, in an interview of yours with Study International, you have mentioned that in the summer you did not go for internships in the companies with big names. Rather, you worked part-time jobs, one of which included working in a pizza area. And how was your experience there? And do you have any advice about job opportunities for Indian students trying to make it in other countries?
Yeah, no, definitely. So I think yes, like I remember when during that summers when I stayed back, I even like most students, because I started realizing how expensive Canada was, right? Right from the time when I landed here, when I had to take that taxi or that Starbucks coffee at the airport, I realized, right? And I think my first instinctive reaction was to get a job. And initially, coming directly after high school and not necessarily building those many experiences, because I think when I was back in India, my school never promoted the idea of co-op, right, or work experience, practical experience. It was all academic and getting a certain grade and everything, and that made you feel like, oh wow, if I'm getting a 95%, I'm incredibly smart and the world is going to love me, right? But then when you hit North America, you realize how that's a very small part of everything else, right? And that everyone has, so it's kind of like the bare minimum in many ways, right? And I think that's when, like, getting those jobs at bigger companies, big organizations were getting really tricky, because and it made sense to me, because I was like, hey, they're asking for what any company would ask for, right? At the end of the day, is those relevant experiences. And especially like coming from a different country, a lot of the experiences back home may not always be considered as fully transferable, because of the changes in the work culture, the cultural standards, etc., right? Which made complete sense. So I was like, you know what, for the money's sake, I started working at a pizza place. I even worked as a dishwasher. I worked as a server at multiple events, etc. So that definitely happened. But I think at the same time, what I started doing is I knew that I want to land certain types of jobs, and I knew for those I need to build certain relevant skill sets. Because working at a part-time place like a cafe or a restaurant won't help me build those skills that'll convince an employer to give me a job at their company, right? One of the top 4 consulting firms. So that's when, in addition to doing that, I started doing online internships with actually different NGOs and different startups as well, completely free of cost initially. Because initially I was like, you know what, actually, I don't have the skill sets. So I will go to them being like, hey, I just want to learn and I'll work for you for free to give me that opportunity to work. And you have a free resource to leverage, right? But once I learned those skill sets, and I think I worked for a lot of these organizations for about a month, and once I learned those relevant skills and built those skill sets for myself, that's when I went back to them and I was like, hey, I've been able to bring you so much return, and I've helped you increase your follow count by so much amount, right? Is there an opportunity to now have a paid opportunity with you, right? And let's say if they said, oh, we cannot offer paid, I would just go to someone else and now start selling myself for paid opportunities instead of unpaid, right? So that unpaid became paid opportunities. I ended up working in that space for 2 years, right? And then building those experiences over those 2 years eventually led me to starting Redefine, and eventually led me to getting into, the 4 consulting firms, right? And then I started with Deloitte. So I think it was all tied in, and I think that goes back to the advice piece for a lot of students who are planning to make a career abroad, is 3 things. One is keep yourself open to trying different experiences, right? I think what I see is a lot of people are coming with one mindset, oh, I want to do just this. No, you never know unless you try it, right? So try everything during that 4-year degree that you have, that 4 years, right, to figure things out. Figure it out, right? Do those internships, and unpaid internship, it's fine. You don't need to earn money through these, right? You need to first build the skills. So do it unpaid initially with these different organizations to get an idea, what do you really like. And once you decide that, and once you're able to provide value, then start demanding for yourself also value, right? So I think that's one. And I think the second piece is like, think out of the box. I think a lot of people, when they even think of getting experiences, they're thinking of only corporate experience, right? But I think experience is basically anywhere where you're working with a team, where you're working towards a particular outcome and helping that company or organization create certain results, right? By using XYZ skills, right? And as long as you're able to do that, that's an experience, right? So it does not have to be a corporate job. It could even be a personal project that you work on, but you then go on to, let's say, maybe that personal project is an app that you built, right? And then you go on to socialize that app with different companies, right? And someone ends up using it and they have a good ROI, right? Now that is your use case. That is that example you can use to be like, hey, see, this has created such outcomes for this company, right? So I think the second is that. And I think the third would just be is one of the most important skills to start developing as early as possible is networking and personal branding. I think they both go hand in hand, which is why I call them one skill. But I think they are the essence today of landing any opportunity, whether it be a job, whether it be events, conferences, awards, anything today. It all comes down to that. So I think the earlier you start building that network for yourself, and the earlier you start reflecting to realize, okay, what do I want my brand to be, right? Who am I, right? Who do I want people to remember me as? That becomes important. So those three things.
Yeah, that's actually really useful because these three advice pieces are really important, and I feel like it's never told to us in school, like you mentioned. So it's really nice to hear from someone who's actually, like actually put these into practice. And also the thing that you said about being financially aware of how much you're spending, where you're spending. I'm sort of experiencing the same thing, though not at maybe the same scale because I'm within India. But when I shifted from Delhi to Bangalore and I was given access to, my parents' bank account, and I was given the responsibility of figuring out how much money I'm supposed to spend. It was really difficult to navigate because I also kept spending, and I was like, oh, we go to these places with my parents very often. So that means I can. But then, like, gradually I realized that that's not exactly
Yeah.
true, and I need to
And it's
learn
very
how to
different when
balance.
you spend with your parents' money versus when you start spending with your own money.
Exactly.
You realize how expensive things are. Like now, when I'm going back to India, I'm buying gifts for my parents and everything. And now I'm realizing, I was like, wow. I remember when I first started earning, also, I was like, wow, the world is expensive. Because, you go out to cafes and restaurants so much with your parents, and you just like, oh, whatever, like so cheap. But then when you start earning yourself, you realize the effort that goes behind earning that money, right? And I think that's why it's so important, because it makes us more grateful for not just our parents, but also for the privileges and opportunities that we have.
Exactly. Like, this is what I experienced in an internship that I did. I worked for a month, and it was a corporate sort of an internship. So I was like 9 to 5 slogging. And then
Yeah.
at the end of the month, I made an okay amount. But in my head, I was like, wow, my father does this, has done this for years.
Yeah.
And this is how he's been, earning. And it was very refreshing, and also an eye opener to realize that it takes so much effort. um
100%.
so talking about job opportunities and all of that, we were also curious as to what was the procedure of landing your first job as a fresher, for the lack of a better word. And would you mind sharing some do's and don'ts for like professional interviews?
Yeah, I think for the first part, I would kind of like bring it back to what I was already talking about and like have a shorter answer to it. But I think what really helped me land that job as a fresher was developing those relevant experiences, right? I think that is incredibly important through those different steps that I mentioned. I think the second piece is being really reflective and knowing the why behind everything. What I mean by that is I think a very few of us spend the time to analyze the why. What I mean by that is why you're doing this job. Why are you applying for this specific company? Why for this specific role? Right. And the reason it's important to look into that why is because every employer is looking for you to answer that question for them, right? At the end of the day as well. Because even when they are planning to invest a certain amount in you, they need to know if you're able to bring them those returns. They need to know, are you passionate about that job, or is it just one of those other jobs for you? Right. And I think that's why that why becomes important. Building those relevant experiences becomes important. And third is building the right network around yourself becomes incredibly important, right? Making sure you're developing connections with as many people as you can in the company that you're wanting to get into, yeah, especially with people in the roles in the company you want to get into, right? To be more specific, and having the right mentors around yourself as well who can guide you in the right direction when the need come be, right? And these mentors don't have to be just very senior people. These mentors could also be peers, right, in your own network, who maybe are building those good experiences for themselves. Surround yourself with those people, and I think you automatically will proceed in life, because as people say, you are always the average of the 5 people you surround yourself with. And I think it is incredibly true. And that's why one thing I say to a lot of young people, especially when we are in that age that we want to be a part of the cool group or whatever, I always say to them is, depending upon the goals you have in life, try and reflect on the people you surround yourself with and see, are those the people who will help you achieve those goals, right? Because if not, sometimes you may want to change your social circle to reflect those future goals. Doesn't mean that if you want to pursue medicine, your friends should be in medicine. No, I don't mean that. But I mean, like, if you are someone who is driven to achieve certain goals for yourself, and if you surround yourself with other people also who are driven to achieve not the same goals, but similar goals, or have the same passion and a dedication towards something else, that's when you definitely are in a space where you will succeed no matter what, right? So I think those 3 things are very important
Hmm.
to get that job.
Thank you, ma'am. Like, as you've already mentioned that networking is such an important skill. So could you give us any tips or insights, like what are these skills required to build a good network of people around you?
Yeah,
And
yeah, and I think, like, I don't even know if it's a specific skill, right? But I think there are specific steps to do so, because I think networking at the end of the day is communication, right? And I think a lot of people think, oh, I'm an introvert, I'm not an extrovert, so maybe I won't be good at networking. No, that is a very bad reason to give to not network, and an excuse to give to not network. I think everyone can network, whether you be an introvert and extrovert. And I think just being in an online space, to be honest, benefits us a lot, because before, when you had to hop on coffee chats with people, it was always in person, right? But I think today you have the opportunity to have that first chat online, which really allows you to get to know that person a little bit more, see if this is someone who I really want to be connecting with them, right? And once you understand that, that's when you can have those follow-up sessions, with some happening in person, some happening online, right? So I think that, therefore, there is that flexibility. And I think, according to me, like, a big part of networking, and there's a difference between networking and effective networking. I think the keys to effective networking is, having that why very clear, in terms of why are you hopping on that call with that specific person? What is something you're hoping to get out of them, right? Get out of them, I don't mean it in a very transactional way. What I mean is, you need to be able to tell that person earlier on in the call, in terms of, hey, this is exactly why I connected with you, and this is what I want to learn from you, right? So that when the other person knows that, they're able to give you the pieces of advice in alignment with that area. But if you enter into the chat and you just tell them, hey, I'm interested in consulting, and just leave it at that, they don't know what to tell you specific to consulting, or what will you benefit from, right? It may be possible that they spend 20 minutes talking about what consulting is and the different areas under consulting, but because you didn't tell them before, maybe you already knew that knowledge, right? And now your entire coffee chat has gone away without you getting the knowledge that you wanted. And that's when a lot of students, I see them come back and be like, Ritika, it's not, networking is not fun, it's not useful, I don't think it's valuable, right? But I think it happens because we aren't approaching it the right way. So I think, having your why very clear, identifying the right people to connect with. Third is putting in the effort and the research to actually hop onto the coffee chat. What I mean by that is coming up with good questions, not just questions you can find on Google through a quick search, but questions that are relevant and individualized to that particular person, their particular industry, their particular company, and their experiences, and asking it relevant to that. And I think the last thing is just being very authentic and genuine in a conversation, right? And making sure, how can that one conversation lead to many more, right? I think those 5 things are very, very important.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah.
So, what is the importance of having the right connections? How can it help in growing any business?
I think it's not just about business, it's also about you at the end of the day, right? I think we all live in a world where we rely on each other in many ways, right? You need those connections, because you cannot be the CEO of a company today, but you can become that CEO of a company in the next 5 years, depending upon who do you know and the work that you put in, right? So the work, the effort is an obvious. You need to put an effort in anything you do, no matter what, right? But I think the networking is where a lot of people fail. And a big example of that is you see how, especially this, I think specifically I see this when people start coming abroad, because you have a lot of these people from India who are these toppers in universities and colleges, but they're not being able to land job opportunities at all. And a big part of it is because, hey, yes, they know that content, but they don't know how to leverage that content, how to stand up for themselves, how to advocate for themselves, or how to leverage the people around them to become people who then speak for them, right? And I think at the end of the day, the goal is that, even for me, the goal has always been is when I enter into a room, how do I make sure I already know everyone in that room? And B, even if I don't know everyone in that room, like how can I make sure they've at least heard of me, right? Through someone else they may know of, right? Because the end goal you want to achieve is that even if you're never in that room, people in that room still talk about you. That's the goal. And that happens only when you build the right connections. And that's not just for growing a successful business. That's for you as yourself becoming successful. No matter what you define success as, it is relating to your network today, right? And you see this with any successful person today. Even Sam Altman, in his, the founder of OpenAI, in his speech was telling someone is you need to have your support network. And it needs to be the correct support network in the first place. A lot of young people always think, oh, it's just about having a lot of friends. No, it's not. It's about having quality over quantity. Even if you have just one person, I call that a network as well, right? But it all comes down to, is that network someone who's reliable? And there are different criteria, right? It could, even if that network or that friend is not someone who's at a high position in a high company, that's okay. But if that's someone who can give you peace and solitude in your time away from work, that network is still a value add to you, right? And then you may have other network of mentors, right, who are these top executives at different companies who are also providing you with that value. So I think it's all about being reflective in that way. And I think for being a successful founder specifically, it first starts with your own personal network and then your business's network, right? I think if your own personal network is successful, your business network and your business opportunities themselves will grow a lot.
Right. So yeah, effective networking and knowing how to navigate that process is really important. Do you believe that having a unique business idea holds more importance, or do you think that one can take an existing idea and do it really differently and still achieve success?
Oh, definitely the second part. I don't think today most ideas aren't unique, very honestly. Most ideas are replication of other ideas. The only difference is they're just done differently, right? And I think that's what makes them unique, right? At the end of the day. So I think even when I initially, was always dreamt of being a founder, I thought I had to get an idea that never existed before. But no, being a founder is not about that. Being a founder is about exploring what currently exists out there, identifying gaps in what currently exists out there, and coming up with solutions to fill those gaps, right? And that solution many times can be very similar. So, for example, even what we do at Redefine is something a lot of people do. Even people who start chocolate companies. There are so many chocolate companies. Why do people still starting? It's the same idea, but all they're trying to do is revolutionize the way they build that chocolate, the way they sell that chocolate, right? Where are the proceeds of selling this chocolate going to? So that is what is happening today. Is it's not necessarily about uniqueness of the idea, but it's about the uniqueness around how are you exploring the idea, how are you growing that business, what are the kind of people who work in your company, right? You will have sometimes women only businesses, right? That itself becomes a value add, because these days I don't think people are buying only a product from you. They're buying an experience, they're buying a feeling, and an opportunity maybe from you, right? And I think creating that is important, right? Even at Redefine, we organize a lot of these networking events and everything. There are a lot of companies who organize that, right? But why is it that students specifically show up to our events more than the others? A big part of it is because of how we make them feel when they show up to those events. And I think how they resonate with myself as a founder is also a big part, right? A founder's story and a founder's connection with those people who in their network becomes important, because to them it feels like them showing up for a family gathering, right? Them showing up to a cousin's meetup that they already know, because they have established that good relationship with them, and because they feel so comfortable and at home around that person. So I think it's a lot about that. So the second piece.
Here on mute.
That was a really good insight that you gave us. That same idea done differently could also lead to a great successful business. So my next question to you is, as you have mentioned in the intro, that you're working as a human capital consultant. Can you tell us more about this field and also tell about the career path you followed to the position that you are working as?
Yeah.
And tell us more about consultancy, how to get into this field.
Yeah. And I think even when we're talking about what my career path is specifically, I would say, like, I don't usually share that because I feel like everyone's career path is so different, right? And especially like my career path would be one of the very different career paths you come across, because I never studied business. I did not get business only experiences, but I'm still in consulting, right? I still work in the entrepreneurship space, and a big part of it is because all of those things I've been mentioning throughout the chat is building that network, personally branding yourself. That's all that matters today. At the end of the day, I 100% believe in it, right? Me not having an education in business at all, right? The only way I learned business was through the experiences that I got, which was also not pure business, but it was more so in the marketing space initially, right? And I think it was those experiences and me just being able to understand the essence of what business is at the end of the day, right? What is business? It is working with people, right? If you know how to work successfully with people, you can run an amazing business, right? Even though you have a bad idea, right? That's the reality, right, today. And that means what you need to really master today is people management. What you need to master today is relationship management. If you know that, I think anything else can be solved for in today's time and age, to be very honest, right? So I think for me, my career trajectory was always based on looking further than the surface, right? I was like, people think, yes, for a business job, you need business experience. I look beyond that. Hey, beyond even the business experience, because I don't want to just stay in a job, right? I want to maybe start my own company. I want to maybe switch between different companies, work for a startup once, right? Work for another type of company. And to do all of that, I need to understand what's the a sense of landing any of these opportunities, because if I'm able to do that essence thing very well, then any of those areas will be open spaces for me to enter into and get opportunities with, because I have that one very transferable and important skill to each business and area. So I think for me, my career trajectory was mostly based on that. It was very, very diverse. I worked in the healthcare space. I worked in the sports science space as well. I've also worked in the marketing space, with different kind of like organizations. So my experience was all over. But I think for me, what helped me really land the job was kind of bringing these diverse experiences together and building that brand, that cohesive brand that showcases my end goal, which was to create an impact no matter what I was doing, and which was to benefit people no matter what I was doing. And at the end of each of those experiences, irrespective of the industry, I was working with a bunch of people and creating a community, right? So it helped people understand and realize that, hey, she can bring forth those skills in communication, leadership, teamwork, etc., right? Critical thinking, which becomes so incredibly important. And I think all of that ties into consulting also and landing any other job. Even consulting, I don't think there's one answer to how you can land that job. But I think at the end of the day, if you can be someone that someone can sit across a table and have a genuine conversation with, you are fit for consulting, because consulting is a very, very people's business. There are certain spaces, there are many different types of consulting, first of all, and there are many different spaces within consulting, right? Like for me, I work under human capital consulting. Within that, I work under organizational transformation. Within that, I work under transformational change. And even within that, I work in another sub-service area called culture and behavior change, right? And there are so many divisions like that, some very technical, some more people driven and oriented. So it all comes down to your passions. And yes, the hiring process may be a little bit different for each, but at the end of the day, it comes down to that idea, because consulting is you selling a service, right? Yes, you obviously doing the service very well and selling it, but the you doing your part very well is an obvious again, right? Because obviously you're getting the job so that you do the job, right? And that do you do it well. But the second piece is what helps you really succeed in a career in consulting. You can get a job with just having the technical skills, yes, but what will help you really succeed in that role or in that job, to get promoted, to get that high pay, is having that communication skill set to be able to actually sell those services to people, bring in clients for the company, because that's when you're becoming a bigger value add, and that's when you become irreplaceable for a company, because you're not just one of many who are just doing the general job, right? You become a one of one, right? Or one of few, right? Which I think is the end goal for a lot of us. So I think like that, I would say, to like just summarize those two questions that you asked me. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I think this is again coming back to what you said about building your own brand and forming an image about yourself so that people in the room, even if you're not there, talk about you. And moving on, we've noticed that you have prior experience as a social media manager in companies like My Restful Mind.
Yeah.
So could you help us navigate the procedure of content monetization on various social media platforms briefly?
Yeah. I think a big piece of, you mean content monetization in the sense from a content creator's perspective, or you mean more from like, how did I start working with My Restful Mind?
Um, Honestly, either.
I
I think, yeah.
Okay, I think a big part of like My Restful Mind overall to me was My Restful Mind was one of those transitionary experiences that I took on to, help me build those relevant skill sets. And as I was mentioning before, I started working free of cost with them also initially, right? And I think when I wanted to do paid opportunities, because they are also a non-for-profit, there wasn't that scope to work paid for them, right? So what I instead started doing is the experiences I had built with them, I leveraged those experiences to work for this other startup. I'm forgetting its name. It's from E. It's a food company. I started working for them. They were my first paid client, right? And for them, I basically leveraged a lot of my experiences with My Restful Mind, and the kind of returns and the kind of following I was able to help them increase in a matter of just a month, right? And that way, I did run a lot of campaigns also with My Restful Mind after that, especially, when I started creating content on LinkedIn. Even when I started my organization, they reached out. So we had multiple collaborations that way. But I think at the end of the day, it was just about leveraging what I'd done there to land those other paid opportunities, even if that current organization was not able to offer that, right? So I think it's also about not sticking always to something just for the sake of it, but finding those right opportunities for yourself and feeling comfortable to move around and switch around, right? And I think it's also, again, it goes back to that relationship building piece, right? Because if I had not left that organization on good terms, we would not be collaborating today on different events and opportunities, right? Even they would not be, how do I say, sponsoring some of our events, providing their speakers, mental health psychologists coming to our events, right? If I had not left it in a good place and if I had not done a good job. But see, that relationship built so long ago is now also being helpful because they, with my organization, see a lot of value now, right? So they will be reaching out, right? So I think it's so crazy how even after like 4 years, that is still seen a value add, and I'm still working with that same organization, just in different capacities now than before. So yeah.
So the next question was something similar. Like, can you give us some inputs on how to build your resume or build your LinkedIn profile to stand out among potential clients?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think a great way to build your LinkedIn profile or anything, I think first is being just genuine and authentic, right? And I know it may sound similar to everything I'm talking about, but I think two things again come to the essence here is, again, knowing your why. Why are you building that LinkedIn profile? Is the whole goal of building this LinkedIn profile to actually like attract the right people within your organization and everything, right? Is it to maybe get certain jobs? But I think with LinkedIn profile, I think those are the two most important things is A, making sure you know your why again, in terms of, okay, why are you starting this profile in the first place? Are you a business and maybe do you want to attract people to buy products in your business? Secondly, are you a career coach, right? Do you want to attract people to your profile to get advice with you, right? Or sign up to get certain services with you? Or are you just a student looking, just curious to learn about jobs in certain spaces? Or are you a student looking to land a job at a particular company? Or are you a student looking to start a business and you're not sure how? Right? I think depending upon all those goals, those things become important because it would dictate how your LinkedIn profile looks like in the first place, right? It would dictate how does your bio look like on LinkedIn. It would dictate what your About Me section talks about. It would dictate the kind of experiences you showcase and even the kind of posts that you put out. I always say to people is like an effective, again, you know how I said networking versus effective networking. Even on LinkedIn, it's the same. A lot of people have LinkedIn accounts, but having a LinkedIn account with no profile photo and with very limited information is not an effective LinkedIn profile because it's not going to bring you any returns. So I think to have an effective LinkedIn profile, the first step is identifying that why. The second step is, once you've understood that why, is to start reaching out to people who have the same why as you. And a great way to find that out is, like, let's say if you're looking for consulting jobs, right? or LinkedIn in the search box, just typing potential consulting jobs or something like that. Because a lot of students who are planning to get into consulting, they will say things like on their profiles, like potential consultant at so and so company, right? Or upcoming consultant at this company, right? Reach out to those people, because the fact that they have got jobs at these consulting firms recently, or they're going to be starting, let's say, in the next 4 months, goes to show that they were applying to these jobs not too long ago, right? And they could be great people to connect with and be like, hey, like, I would love to learn from you in terms of how did you get those jobs, and at the same time observe their profiles, see what are some things that they are mentioning, and leverage those things. It's not about copying them, it's about learning from them and taking inspiration and individualizing it to your own profile, right? I think, and that's the second step. And I think the third step is just making sure you yourself invest a lot of time in doing that research. That comes to, yes, talking to people, but also doing your general research. Like, for example, if you're interested in landing jobs in banks, right, making sure you're using the right hashtags on LinkedIn becomes very important, because a lot of recruiters today hire you by using hashtags in the search box on LinkedIn. So if they're looking for someone as a software engineer, who's a software engineer, they might just type hashtag software engineer, right? And if you're someone who is in that background and has studied there, but because you didn't use that correct hashtag, right, either in your post or either on your profile itself, because of SEO, you're not going to show up anywhere on the list. So you automatically are not even a part of their search, right? Which is unfortunate, because that is the visibility you want to create today. And I think that's when I go back to this idea of visibility today in North America or anywhere else in the world is very important in the job market today. You need to make sure that people know who you are, whether it be specific employers, whether it be specific companies, or even people working at companies. It doesn't even have to be employers at the end of the day, because a lot of companies today are also hiring internally, right? So if you know people who are even just employees at those companies, that's very beneficial, because if someday a job comes up, they could be like, hey, I've actually been connecting with this person for some time, they may be great for this role. And you get hired for a role that's not even made available in the market, because a lot of companies hire internally, right? So I think it's a lot of those things around it. So I would say those 3 steps to start with.
Yeah, thank you. And just lastly, do you want to convey anything more to our listeners that we might have not covered in the questions?
I think one thing, if I can say to everyone, is just know that you're capable. And I think a lot of people take a lot of time to realize that, right? I think each one of us has everything that we want to do, right? I see a lot of students also sometimes get overwhelmed and intimidated and be like, hey, how are these people winning so many awards? How are they getting so many, like, like going to so many events, being speakers here, this and that? And what I've done, and I've been through those phases as well. Each one of us goes through it, as a matter of fact, right? But what I've realized through all of that is it all comes down to effort. And I promise you that people who have those 6 awards, trust me, they didn't get that just sitting around, right? If you go reach out to those people, talk to them, hey, how did you get those awards? That's when your comparative nature and that jealousy you may feel with someone initially turns into inspiration and motivation, because you start up realizing how much effort has gone behind that, right? And now you don't question yourself and be like, hey, am I not that capable? No, you won't question yourself, because you're like, hey, I haven't put in that effort that that person is putting in. Obviously there is going to be a difference in the kind of outcomes you achieve, right? One of my friends, who is just super super amazing, in the kind of work that she's doing, she told me that she used to initially invest 2 hours every morning, 5 to 7 a.m., 5 a.m. to 7 a.m., just reaching out to people multiple times, just asking for speaking opportunities, right? Because I used to ask her, like, how do you create these things? And she said, obviously it's not like I'm sitting around and people are just approaching me to be like, hey, please come, right? She said, no, again, it comes to visibility. You are capable. And that's what even I started looking is, you see, I'll reach out to everyone. A lot of people even have ego sometimes here. I said, what's there to have ego? Because at the end of the day, each one of us is capable. The only thing you have to do is, because we live in such a big world, you have to make yourself visible to those people, to those right people, right? A lot of student clubs also may not know about myself or the work I do, and that's completely okay. It's such a big world, right? And it makes sense, why not? So that's why it's my responsibility, if I want those opportunities, that I reach out to those people, let them know about the work I'm doing, so that if they can see value, then there's an opportunity for me there. But the first step is making yourself visible to those people, right? And I think that's where a lot of people fail out on, is because they just start questioning themselves. But the reality is, we aren't putting in those hours, because if we do, each one of us can get those awards and everything, right? It's just about putting in the effort, sacrificing that social social time, sometimes sacrificing that time to go watch a movie, and instead spending that time heads down applying for an application, right? And if you do that, it's just a whole different game altogether.
Right. Thank you so much, ma'am, for devoting time to our podcast and for shedding light on so many important topics. And we hope our listeners were as enlightened as and empowered as we were through this conversation today. Team Girl Up Shisha sincerely thanks you for taking the time to speak with us and wishes you all the best for all your future endeavors.
Yes, amazing. And thank you so much to the both of you as well, Samiksha and Shreya, and even Arna as well. I really appreciate your time. And I hope, if not now, maybe in the future, we can work on some in-person initiatives. Even though I may not be there, that's fine. But, we can still, further impact together. I think that'd be really, really amazing because you guys are also doing some amazing work. And so good job on what you're doing. And thank you for having me.
Thank you.